sold our place and got my garden, didn't get the vegetables. Two of us
See, my anniversary's all still swimming.
trying to get things out the
Did your place survive the fire? Or
Yeah, it did. We were blessed.
Oh,
Right up there, fire right there. We
really?
burned some steps.
My guy cleaned out that low flow channel.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Oh,
Cleaned
okay.
out the-
in the Chalet Village area, or was it?
Yeah, it's not, we hadn't had any rain. It's
Bill.
it's good though. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Actually ended up getting, there was a lot of old dirt, there were 20 years that kind of the bottom, he got all that cleaned out too.
Long weekend.
Yeah, it definitely
That's what
changes
time
the
you're up
look
there after.
through there. You can actually
Drove up
see the
there.
post office.
Down the road. Look at the old hotel and
Where
all
shall I
those.
go? And then off. Just put them
It's easier to read when you get
friends of mine who happen to be the managers of the Highlands condos and the mayor. Something's wrong with their printer.
Yeah,
They
he's-
just said it all.
Oh, he's been
Come
taking
up to visit with me.
I want to call the July 20th, 2017 meeting of the Farragut
Me the wrong
Municipal
way.
Planning Commission to order. We're going to start with citizens forum. This is a time that anybody who is not here with the item that's on the agenda, if you have a question or comment, we invite you to come up to the microphone and ask your question or make your comment. But if you have something that's on an agenda, wait till we get to that number. Mark, I think you have an announcement to
Oh,
make?
yeah. I have a pleasant announcement. I have been lucky enough to get I think going to be an excellent replacement for Ashley. And it's Bart Hose. I'll introduce him here. He's actually worked for 23 years with local planning, and he helped the town work on our original transportation and land use policy plan. He pretty much put most of that together, as well as our community facilities plan. So he's pretty familiar with the town. He's been working with TEMA for the last few years, but I think this planning stuff is coming back pretty quick for him. So we'll throw him in there and give him some good experience, some additional tasks. So I'm sure y'all will be seeing him. And he'll probably be staffing some of these meetings as well in the future. So we're glad to have Bart with us and look forward to working together. That's all I have.
Welcome, Mark.
Gotten to know Bart over the years and at meetings I've been to, and we're real excited that he's here. He's got some really great experience that the town's going to enjoy. Move on to approval of the agenda.
Shouldn't be any changes to the agenda.
Move we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And I abstain. I think we got a couple other people to abstain that weren't with us last month.
Not from the agenda.
Oh, the agenda, I'm sorry. Trying to get ahead of myself. Want to move it on and get out of here. So that's the approval of the minutes, the June 15th, 2017. Do we have any changes to that?
Motion approved. Is presented.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Abstain.
Three of us are.
Yeah, three of us. So item number 4, discussion and public hearing on a re-subdivision plat involving a Y12 Federal Credit Union property at 13128 Kingston Pike, 5.3 acres. Zone C-1, Daniel Humphreys applicant.
Property is actually back in September 2006. There was a plat that came before you that when the Y12 Federal Credit Union was constructed in the far west part of town before you get to Dixie Lee Junction. And as part of that plat, it was anticipated that the southern portion would be developed at some point in the future. So they platted a permanent access easement along the eastern boundary of that parcel that would be for the benefit of the area to the south and also the properties to the east, so that they would all come out at a controlled point on that major arterial road on Kingston Pike. This particular request is a fairly simple plat. It's just subdividing this original parcel into 2 lots. This particular request would actually require 2 separate actions, one of which is a variance request from our subdivision regulations for the requirement for 10% open space. That's a requirement, as y'all may remember from other minor subdivisions, for subdivisions involving more than 50,000 square feet. So this particular area in the back, Lot 2, as shown here on this re-subdivision plat, is actually planned to be part of the planned commercial development. It came before you all a couple of months ago and is in rezoning ordinance 17-10. And as part of that development, as you may remember, they're providing required open space. So in terms of the variance to the subdivision regulations for the open space, as long as it's clear on this plat that the open space will be provided as part of this planned commercial development as reflected in ordinance 17-10, the staff would support that particular variance request. It is also a minor subdivision, simply separating a parcel into 2 lots. So with that, I would recommend approval of the variance request, and then we'll have to act on the plat separately.
Is there anybody here with the applicant?
I am the applicant.
Do you have anything you want to say, or, okay.
We don't have an objection to the, adding the note that Mark has requested.
They'll have to bring a plat before you all that actually combines all those parcels and lots into the planned commercial development. So when they do that, Lot 2 will become part of that development.
I'm a little confused. How many total lots are there that's going to be in this planned community development if you split this one?
Well, this particular re-subdivision is probably something that the developer in Y12, I'm guessing, is related to some kind of agreement between the developer of the planned commercial development and Y12 Federal Credit Union. I don't recall exactly how many parcels are part of this planned commercial development. It's several, you can see there, and parts of existing parcels, so there's a number of them.
Well, I'm looking at Exhibit C. Is that in the dark outline, the planned commercial
yes.
development area?
Yep, and the
Okay,
Lot
and
2.
that one
that's-
section down there.
Yeah, Lot 2 that's part of this plat is shown there, kind of in the northwest corner
Right.
of what would be that planned commercial development.
Okay, so then what you're saying is that we would have 10%
In the-
open space considering the total
Yeah,
of that
of the planned
outlined
commercial
area?
development. And they would
Okay.
need a plat note to that effect referencing the ordinance
Okay,
that's associated with the planned commercial development, so it is clear. That's the reason why
yeah,
the staff would support a variance, because that open space is actually being provided for as part of the larger development that this Lot 2 will be part of.
okay, I'm on the same page now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Move for approval of the 10% variance, provided that the Lot 2 is combined in the plat, and the plat note is added.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
So we move on to the second part here.
Plat itself, yeah. And the staff's recommendation was approval of the plat, subject to that note being added to the plat regarding the open space.
I'd move for approval for the addition of that plat note, as a stipulation.
Second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item number 5, discussion and public hearing on the site plan for the addition of the Farragut ENT building at 144 Concord Road, 1.4 acres, Zone C-1, urban engineering applicant.
This particular development is fairly recent. It's behind the Capitol Bank, which fronts on Concord Road. So you really can't, unless you're just looking in that direction, you really can't see this building from Concord Road. So it's kind of hidden there. But that site plan for the original building was approved back in 2013, and it's roughly an 8,000 square foot building. What the applicant's requesting at this time is a 2,000 square foot addition on the southwest portion of that existing building. This building, of course, predates our architectural design standards. Though it's a nice looking building, it doesn't meet our masonry requirement that we have increased recently through those standards. So the question before you is whether it's better to try to meet that requirement or to have a mixture of materials that complement the larger remainder of the building. The staff's position on that is that it would look better and actually be more consistent with the goals of the architectural design standards to try to meet proportionately the materials that you have on the 8,000 square foot existing building. I think it might look a little odd if you were trying to have 75% masonry on the 2,000 square foot addition. It might look better from our position. It would look better to have it proportioned in terms of materials to what's already there. The only comment staff had left on the site plan was just to coordinate some landscaping that's going to have to be relocated as a result of this project to make sure that there won't be any interference with utilities and platted utility easements. But all other aspects of this addition are compliant.
Chris, will you tell us who you are and give us an address?
Sorry, the site engineer, Chris Sharp, Urban Engineering, 11852 Kingston Pike. And Mark described the project accurately. The building materials on the addition will be identical to what is there now. We're even going to reuse the light fixtures that were night sky compliant. I guess our thought on the landscaping was wait till the utilities are marked, and then we can, basically that's the only way to ensure that they go where they need to go without conflicting with what's underground.
Anybody have any questions, comments?
I'm comfortable with the matching the exterior of the building with the same coverings, which is the stucco and the stone. However, I think we ought to go on the record with maybe because that particular addition is really not going to be seen from adjacent right-of-ways. Mm-hmm. That might be important to go on the record so we don't set a precedent, because there's going to be other times when this comes up where it is going to be a much more visible location, and maybe it's not quite such a minor addition, even though it's roughly going to increase the size of the building by over a quarter or about a quarter. But nevertheless, I think having some language in ultimately the action item would be important, so we don't set a precedent.
Yeah, I very much agree with that
Yes,
statement.
me too. I don't want the building to look odd, for lack of a better word, because it has been there and before. But at the same time, we don't want to set in precedent with that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure how to craft a motion. We may not be quite ready for a motion. Then I think there might be some more discussion. There might be some folks in the audience that have some questions. But we might want to think about how we could craft something. My initial thought is due to the fact that it's just really not visible because of the landscape buffer kind of back behind the building that backs up to the old farmhouse on Concord Road, as well as it's just tucked back there behind you. I just don't think anybody's ever really going to see it.
I think that's sufficient language to some extent that the proposed addition is not visible,
Or minimally visible might,
or, would be difficult to see from adjacent properties or rights of ways.
right.
So how would you write that in and not be too subjective?
Well, I want to just have something on the record that if somebody comes back and looks at it and say, well, you did that for them back in 2017. I have a
We
big
just don't
10,000
want it to be-
square foot building. We now want it to be 20,000 square feet, and we want to use the same materials that we used 20 or 30 years ago. Just want to make sure it's pretty obvious that's not an apples for apples
Right.
comparison.
Just
I
don't
got a
want to have
question.
a blanket
Where about,
variance.
where do you force to change the whole building when you're,
Typically, we've had some language that has to do that if your renovation costs exceed, and this is subjective, 50, is it 50%?
Yeah,
If it
they'd be
exceeds-
well below that.
Yeah, it's well below that. I mean, we could hold an applicant's feet to the fire on this if we wanted to. I just don't think that was our intent when we
I
did
don't-
the
I don't think
architectural
it's a
design
good idea
standards.
In this instance, but I worry about being, overly concerned about the brick on a building that would cause it would have to be basically redone, the whole quasi.
I agree. I think that would be an unfair hardship to put on the applicant to tell them, well, you got to bring the entire building into compliance with this scenario. And I don't think that was our intent. I just think we should have some language that there may be maybe other buildings that are far more visible locations in the future that come to us, and I just want to make sure we don't create a potential slippery slope tonight.
Hey, and to the layperson, going forward, would there be a color match difference in trying to match? I mean, because
I think they won't have any trouble matching the stucco. That's any of the stucco subcontractors will. I mean, once it's finished, in a year or two, when the landscaping's starting to mature, you'll probably never even know it's an addition. So I'm not concerned about that. I don't think it makes sense to make them do 75% masonry. I don't think that necessarily was our intent under this circumstance. However, we could. Just because we could doesn't necessarily mean that we should.
I think, in my opinion, and I agree with staff, that it would look out of place.
Right.
Yeah, it would. And it is not readily visible from any right-of-way. There's a substantial, there's a detention pond, that regional detention pond that serves that whole development is right behind the building, and it's heavily wooded between the pond and, I can't remember, is it Roan Drive?
Is that right?
It comes around.
Runs next to the church.
It is.
I think it is Roan.
I think it is Roan, but it is a substantial, because I've had to put tick spray on and walk through it, so yeah, I mean, it's substantial.
The old football stadium lights.
Yeah.
It wasn't that many years ago. That's the side of the old Farragut High School.
Yeah.
And those old lights were still, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the football stadium lights were still there. I think they finally have fallen down.
Probably.
At any rate, I think generally speaking, it sounds like that I think we're all comfortable with this. I'm not sure if there was any other items from anybody else or any other questions. We just got to figure out how to draft a motion.
And the only other subject too was with the
Just
landscaping.
coordinating the landscaping, yeah. He had taken care of all the other comments. I mean, what you're trying to do is balance the proportion of materials on the exterior. I think that's important. Even if the materials aren't necessarily what we have as our standards, but you are trying to, balance the proportion of the materials, because that makes it look like it fits in as opposed to kind of being out of place. Then also the addition is in a location where it's, very difficult to see from an adjacent property or right-of-way. So I think those two things would, kind of be good reasons for justifying a
variance.
variation from that masonry. And it's also not anywhere near 50%. If they were adding a building that was half the size of what they have, then I'd have to give it some more thought.
And I don't know if it helps the verbiage, I'm sorry, ma'am.
Go right ahead.
I don't know if it helps the verbiage for this particular motion, but technically in this case, it's not visible from any right-of-way.
I don't think it is either. I mean, I'm
You
pretty
can't,
familiar with that
'cause
property.
it's all access easement through, through
Yeah,
the old shopping center.
Yeah, definitely can't see it from
even see it
Concord
from
or Kingston
Concord.
Pike. And Roan, there's so much
Yeah.
trees and all that fence line's grown up over the years.
Yeah. So, I mean, literally, it is not visible from any right-of-way at that point.
But we're not really trying to set new criteria or standards. I just formed the motion, something to the effect that considering the proportion of the new addition to the total, or to the old, and the visibility.
Or
from,
lack of visibility thereof.
Non-visibility from right-of-ways, that you would move to accept this addition.
Do we need two, is it two action items? One for the variance from the architectural design standards? Can we just craft it all into one approval?
Yeah, I think it'd just be part of the site plan approval.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I think I'm going to make a stab at this. Unless was there anybody else had any questions or comments? Ed?
It's just a proportion thing, but I think it's also it's in harmony with the existing structure. So therefore, it's not just the amount.
But it's three factors, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really,
Go ahead, Ed.
there has to be, one of the reasons we're not objecting to it is because it blends in with the existing facility. If you were to actually make an attempt to go look at it, but it's also, it's not visible. It's not as big an addition, and it's in harmony with what's the existing. So you can't do it just on in harmony alone, because you have an old dilapidated building and did the same thing.
It'd still be harmonious.
But but that's still a criteria. You wouldn't want this. One of the things is you're for this in one part because it matches what's there.
Mm-hmm. You want to try that motion, Ed?
No.
You're making it more complicated.
The
Well, I just
addition
think there's three elements.
doesn't constitute substantial improvement, which is that 50% of the,
Yeah.
the initial construction cost. I mean, I don't know if that helps.
Well, that's not necessarily a automatic reason why an applicant said, well, we don't have to do that. I mean, we
Sure.
could hold your feet to the fire on this particular thing.
Right.
Says your addition has to be. So I hate to put that in there. I think Ed's in harmony. I think the lack of visibility, and what was the third item? Proportion.
The visibility is the one that's really.
But to me,
throws it
I
in.
think that's the big one.
That's the big one.
Right. All right, here, let's try. Let's see if I can.
You have to meet the other two, but the third one you got to meet.
A motion to approve the site plan for an addition to the Farragut ENT building at 144 Concord Road, provided the variance is probably not the right word, providing an exception to the architectural design standards, being that the building lacks visibility from adjacent right-of-ways, and the building's materials will be in harmony with the rest of the building. And I've lost what's the third one again?
Proportion.
And the proportions are consistent with the rest of the building. Is that reasonably close? Do you think that makes sense? Somebody opens the records up in 10 or 20 years and they read that, it's going to...
Mark will
so.
dress it up.
Okay.
No.
Have you got that?
I think so. You don't want to say anything about it, the scale of the addition, it doesn't matter to me.
That's what he said, proportion.
Okay. Proportion to the rest of the building.
And with the subject to?
What was the other subject to with the coordination with town staff on landscaping and utilities?
And you don't need that repeated again, do you, Mark? Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate you not making me do that
That
again.
was fine. I think I got the general idea.
That motion.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Item number 6, discussion and public hearing on a site plan for the exterior renovations for the office building at 11165 Kingston Pike, less than 1 acre, zone C-1, Stuart Anderson applicant.
This item involves primarily a facade renovation on an old building that actually predates the town. It is just to the east of West End Avenue, Farragut Cleaners east of that. And what they're wanting to do, the building is a stucco, boxy-looking building, and they're wanting to redo the facade of it on the front and the sides, and add some more, maybe a defined cap and some articulation to the building, which would clearly, from the staff's perspective, bring the building much more into compliance with their architectural design standards. I mean, without just tearing the whole building down and starting over, it would be hard to bring it into full compliance with our design standards. I do think this is a move in the right direction.
This
But that's-
the dental office? I'm trying to remember. Is this
The one right next to it.
Okay, but with the little the music training.
No, the building with the music training is the dental office
Okay.
building. This one's just right next to it on the west.
Between that and the Century 21 building.
Yes.
I believe
Okay.
so, yes.
Yeah, it's east of that building.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there's 2 or 3 buildings right there in a row that are pretty old, kind of a similar. So, yeah, I mean, it's not ideal, but I do believe that this definitely takes an existing building and makes it look much better than what we have in a reasonable manner. I don't think it's reasonable to make them tear the building down. It also gets the building front a little bit further away from Kingston Pike because the existing covered area on the front there protrudes a little closer to Kingston Pike than what they're proposing. In the back of the building, they've kind of resurfaced with concrete what was largely kind of an old gravel and asphalt, broken up asphalt area. Again, there's really nothing about the building or the site that complies with any of our requirements. But since they have kind of formalized this a little bit back there, they do need to go ahead and make it a compliant, as best they can, compliant parking lot in the back and add some terminal islands on the ends and in the northwest corner. And they also need to update their elevation certificate. They had blocked in part of the back of the building, and since that is a flood area, a flood fringe through that rear part of that site and the building itself, they have added some vents, some enclosures for the water to be able to flow through the foundation, so it doesn't put hydrostatic pressure on the walls of the building. But I think based on what they provided with their initial elevation survey, they might need to add a few more square inches of enclosure space to meet the town's requirements. So that's something we can work with their civil engineer on, but they're aware of that. So with those stipulations on the site plan, which I think we can work with Stewart on what we need on that, if you all are comfortable with that. But we would recommend approval of the facade renovation.
Is there anything in that basement level?
No, it's just basically just elevated, it's like a crawl space more or less, really. It's not meant to be habitable space at all.
So there's no intent to kind of come back and put something
No,
down there?
none whatsoever.
So they only access that stairway to the back?
I'm sorry?
They only access from the back is
The
parking,
stairway
the stairwell.
accesses the main floor level.
Yeah.
They couldn't actually finish that space out. That would be in violation of the flood regulations, because it isn't well within the flood fringe in that area.
Well, it looked like they blocked it in without the town's input, so.
Did block it in. We didn't know about it until it was done.
So there's parking currently behind it, or there will add?
Well, what's happened, it was kind of just an informalized, broken up asphalt gravel area. It wasn't landscaped or anything, but they've made it nicer. I mean, it's a much better surface, obviously, but it's still that's a time to where you go ahead and need to formalize it because they're going to be using it for parking spaces. So it needs to be treated as, a parking lot and meet the parking lot requirements that we hold everybody else to, which can be done back there. They're just going to have to cut out some of it and formalize it and then landscape some of the area. But we could, work that through with the developer on that, or the owner.
Okay, so that needs to be a subject to in the motion.
We would recommend that be a subject to, that the site plan would have to be modified to reflect a compliant parking lot in the back, even though we all know it, has never been compliant, and this is better than what they had, but it still needs to be, brought into compliance.
As well as the vents, does that need to go in the?
Yeah, we just need to verify that the elevation certificate for what they've done with the enclosures in the back is compliant with the town's flood regulations.
Does that meet everything we need in the?
That would meet all the items that the staff was concerned about. And now whether y'all are comfortable with what they're doing on the front, like I said, from a staff's perspective, I think what they're doing on the front is a great improvement to what they have. So that's up to you all to make that final determination.
I commend them for one thing, for making this improvement. I think it'll be a major, much better
Appreciate
looking
that.
building.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Somebody want to try this motion? We've got some challenging motions tonight.
I'll try it. I make a motion that we accept the backade renovation as proposed in the revised site plan, subject to the landscaped islands in the back of the building being added, and verify compliance with the parking lot setbacks. Also subject to the elevation certificate being updated to ensure compliance with the requirements. Is that sufficient, Mark?
That sounds good to me. Yep.
Second?
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
All right, thank
Thank
you. Have
you.
a good night.
Item number 7, discussion and public hearing on a concept plan for McPhee Manor, east side of McPhee Road, across from Bridgemore subdivision. Parcel 25 and 26, tax map 152, 42.5 acres, zone R-1, OSR, placemaker partnership applicant.
This particular item is kind of unusual, and we do have one person that wants to speak on this, public, that I know of. This concept plan was actually, as y'all may remember, part of Bridgemore, and it's actually on there, has been on all their concept plans as part of the Bridgemore development. But apparently, back in, as best we can determine, around 2007, maybe even before that, there was a transfer of property to another entity, and basically a conservation easement was placed on the property east of McPhee Road, which, as you all know, that's a lot of that is floodplain and wetlands, which, so it's maybe not a bad idea to do that anyway. But part of that conservation easement was that they had to limit the development to 10 lots, 10 house lots. So what they're doing now is coming before you with a concept plan. This is just the concept layout at this point. They'll still have to come before you with a preliminary plat and a final plat, but showing their desired layout of the 10 house lots. What the little black marks are there along McPhee Road are the access points. McPhee Road is an arterial road, minor arterial, and accesses have to be 400 feet apart, new accesses. So all those access points, I've had their engineer verify that they're all at least 400 feet apart. so they would comply. What will happen there is that there'll be some joint access easements, or there could potentially be somebody come in and buy 2 or 3 lots as well. But ultimately, the access points will have to be at least 400 feet apart. The remaining comments on the concept plan are at your places, and I can go through those if you want, but it's mainly just dealing with what we will need at the more detailed preliminary plat level, including potentially additional fire hydrants, detention area, access to the detention area, those kinds of things. They will also need to provide a copy of proposed covenants that relate to this subdivision and this property, that would be reviewed and approved ultimately by our town attorney, and show those shared permanent access easements that will be platted on the final plat. So another thing we'll be looking for when they get to the preliminary plat and final plat stages is making sure those minimum floor elevations meet the town's freeboard requirement of 4 feet above the base flood elevation. In other words, the structures have to be elevated to 4 feet above what's identified as the base flood elevation through that area. And then just with the understanding that this is just a concept plan, it could change when the more detailed preliminary plat is prepared. But we always mention that because of the vested rights ordinance that we've talked about and that we approved a couple of years ago to make sure that it's clear that this is just a concept plan at this point. So with that, I can turn it over to any questions you may have. They will have to update the Bridgemore concept plan, and that'll be coming before you all in September. There'll be another phase of Bridgemore preliminary plat that will be coming before you all next month, likely. But they're aware of the fact that they are going to have to update the concept plan for Bridgemore on the west side of McPhee Road because the east side is no longer apparently part of Bridgemore. So the open space that they were using to count toward fulfilling Bridgemore's 35% open space can no longer be counted on the east side. So they have to make sure that the land on the west side of McPhee Road can stand alone and meet all the requirements of the open space residential zoning district. So, which they may end up losing a lot or two over on the west side. So we didn't know about this. The concept plan for Bridgemore has been presented to you all a number of times since 2007, and we were never made aware of any property transactions that had occurred on the east side. So it was kind of surprising to us. But with that, we would recommend approval with those subject twos that are before you.
Shouldn't that be Creekside instead of McPhee Manor?
It is. It's called Creekside. Well, I had to keep it as the way it was advertised in the paper. It was McPhee Manor. That was before our initial review of the plan, which one of our comments was we've already got a McPhee Manor, so you're going to have to change the name. And that's when they, on resubmittal, they changed it to Creekside Estates.
So from here on
Have
out,
you
it
got
will
that
be.
straightened out now, Mark?
Creekside Estates?
Yeah,
Yeah, as far as I know, we don't have a Creekside Estates that I'm aware of in the town, but they are supposed to check countywide, to make sure that there aren't any conflicts.
And that would all come back again if there is, with the name change.
I believe they've checked on that
Okay.
already, but and I do have, Robin Hill, I think, he's signed it to speak on this.
Tell us who you are and where you live.
Good evening. I'm Robert M. Hill, 11504 Mountain View Road, Knoxville, Tennessee, Farragut, Tennessee. I'm here to be sure that we maintain the integrity of that wetland that you see on the map there. I got my magnifying glass out and read the notes on the lower left side of the map. And one thing that comes through real clear is this map is not it's a map that's been copied from a lot of other data. It doesn't represent any field work at all. Now that's not a problem right now, but I think before you go as far as having a preliminary plat, you ought to be sure that all of the field work has been done in accordance with the state requirements. The integrity of the wetland, I think, is terribly important because there are not many wetlands in nature. They're put there for a purpose, and that's to provide a place for water to go when in the flood zone. Also provides a place for a lot of different kinds of biota to live. And it also becomes, if it's not protected, a place where tires and refrigerators and old cars and mattresses and things are dumped. And that's not good. I would really like to see this wetland protected on the wetland boundary with lots 1 through 10 by a fence. And not just a fence that's a mythical fence, but a fence that has some structure and definitely defines the wetland and what's in it. I would further like to see this wetland administered by the town of Farragut to ensure that its integrity is maintained. I don't know how the subdivision regulations on this, or subdivision association documents on this particular subdivision are going to read, but I live next to a subdivision, it's rather large, Glen Abbey. In that subdivision, on the west side, there is, within the lots of the people who live in Glen Abbey subdivision, a 25-foot buffer zone that complies. At the beginning, it complied with the town's requirements for buffer zones and doesn't allow any planting or cutting or anything of that sort. That buffer zone, I find, and when I've talked to residents who live next to me, once the house changes hands in a couple of times, it's subsequently the people don't even know it's there. It's just part of their yard. I don't want this wetland to become part of the yard of lots 1 through 10 at all. I want to avoid that at all costs. And that's a literal statement. I really would like to see the Planning Commission ask the Stormwater Advisory Council Committee to identify the wetlands with the help of the planner, Mark and his staff, in the town so that we'll know where wetlands are. Now, I sat where you are for 27 years, and we worried a little about wetlands, and we protected most of them, but we haven't gotten to the point that we have now where land's valuable and the requirements to protect land that's wetland goes away the farther you get away from the initial creation of the wetland and the subdivision requirements. And so that's my message to you on this. This is a concept drawing, and you ought to read those notes carefully, because you shouldn't be in position to have to approve a preliminary plat that hasn't had a legitimate survey on it. And I'd really, while this is not relevant to this particular piece of property, I'd really like to know if any of the property across the creek from the backside of this property, which is the east side, is in a wetland also. And we ought to, if those are not identified on the current development area there, they ought to be. So I'll leave that with you, but this wetland is important. It's important to me, because I like wetlands, but it's important because it's important to nature. And your job is to, in large part, is to be sure that planning is done so that all facets of the planning process get looked at. And preserving nature is one of the things that needs to be looked at every time. You all have any questions?
I have a question of Mark. Explain the conservation easement just a little bit to us.
Well, I haven't read the conservation easement.
Yeah, Mark, I'd like to get a copy of that too. You got that long email with 10 questions on it or so from it.
Yeah.
Maybe we can sit down and talk about those sometime. You might
Yeah,
want to
we'll-
share that with the planning commission.
Yeah. When they get to the more detailed information, and Bob's right about, they are going to have to do field verification of the actual wetland, delineation. Now, the area there shown in greenish yellow is the approximate wetlands based on information that was obtained whenever Billy Fulgham did the original preliminary plat for Ridgemore back in 2006. So that could have changed somewhat, and it would need to be reassessed to make sure that's still accurate, so that we can make sure that the wetlands and the aquatic buffer that's required beyond the wetlands, it's a 25-foot area beyond the outer limit of the wetlands, is actually on the open space lot, which is what it's shown right now. All the floodplain and all the wetlands and the aquatic buffer for the wetlands are all shown on this concept plan as being on the open space lot. That's what that shaded area is to the eastern portion of this development, of this subdivision. So they have at least included it on an open space lot and not on house lots. So that is a very good method of protection, because for somebody to get into the wetlands, they technically would be trespassing onto the homeowners association property. And so I'm sure that's one of the objectives of having a conservation easement on this entire tract, was to offer protections to the wetlands and the flood plain that is pretty substantial on the eastern part of this concept area.
One of my comments at the end of the letter I wrote Mark yesterday about this is that if I were the developer of this area and were a future homeowner, I think just on the basis of getting rid of a headache potentially for myself or some future owner, having the town have domain over that wetland would be very simple and would relieve the homeowners and the developer of any future worry about whether it's going to be, the integrity is going to be held or not.
Did I understand you, Robert, to say that in the subdivision next to you, that, or some of your neighbors had more or less claimed, maybe by adverse possession, that part of the wetlands was their lot?
Well, it's not adverse possession because it's in their lot.
Oh, it's in their lot.
It's inside their lot, on their side of the line.
Description in the deed?
So they've just proceeded with whatever they want to do in that area, which includes, I don't have a fence between the two pieces of property, so some of the things they do come on my side of the property.
But am I understanding you to say that by legal description in their deed?
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes.
Okay.
That was an agreement made sort of in the dark many years ago.
There's a buffer strip on some of these older subdivisions, do have buffer strips on house lots, and we realized that was a big mistake years later.
Yeah.
Because people they don't
agree with
know what a buffer strip is, and they aren't told properly sometimes, or sometimes they don't care. And I've had to go over to Glen Abbey a number of times and have people replan and do things in the buffer But that's not what they're showing on this concept plan. The environmentally sensitive areas are on the open space, on an actual open space lot. Now, there is a pretty heavily tree-covered area on the far southern portion of this, and it looks pretty steep, too.
It's
That will be
identified
questionable.
on the drawing. I think that came off a GIS map.
Yeah, this area is, here's a tree-covered area
Yeah.
extent, and then this is all really steep. So I question whether that lot really is developable, and I could very easily see that one being combined with the one to the north, because this is pretty steep coming off this particular slope. And it's, pretty heavily tree covered as well. But other than that, I think the rest of it's open field, and all the house lot area, at least on this concept plan, is out of the floodplain and the wetland and the aquatic buffer for the wetland.
My concern leaving that with the subdivision association is that they would be responsible for the integrity of the wetland, and they would in fact have to agree to sue one of their neighbors if the wetland is infringed on. And if the town has control of that, that's not a problem. We don't worry about neighbor-to-neighbor feelings, but if you have a neighbor on both sides of you that you like, you're not likely to take him to court. Or it's not a good practice anyway.
Well, at a very minimum, the wetlands should be identified in the town.
And preserved. Yeah, I want to emphasize that word, preserved. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, I think we need to emphasize that comment about the 400 feet separation, because this concept plan doesn't meet that, so.
No, it's they've got an updated one that he had emailed me. It calls out the actual dimensions, and I think maybe the applicants here, engineering firm, they're very much aware of the 400 feet, and they will have to make sure that the concept plan does reflect that 400-foot spacing.
Well, the current one we're looking at doesn't.
No, that was the previous plan. I think that they had sent, and I still had the same comment to them on that one, so that will need to be addressed.
How far along are you with them on the subject twos?
I've sent it to them. I haven't heard anything on the subject twos.
Seems like we're a little preliminary on approving this then.
Well, that's up to you all. I mean,
They got to come back before us with a preliminary
That was
plat.
a
So this is just a
preliminary.
concept plan.
It's just
so
a
they,
concept.
even if they wanted to go start construction and install fire hydrants today, they couldn't. So it's just a concept plan. I like Bob Hill's idea about trying to delineate the wetlands in a better fashion. I think the idea of the fence is a great idea. I don't know if we have the jurisdiction or the authority to be able to enforce that, but what I have seen in some areas, and I think I've seen it up in the panhandle of Florida on some of their wetlands, where they just have just a little sign that says these areas are protected wetlands, no encroachment with, vehicles or equipment, no dumping, things like that, where you could have some of those. That way it's, when you do get a homeowner, especially a second or third generation homeowner that is there and they say, well, that looks like my backyard to me, and I want to go back there and start, bush hogging it and, maybe make an area for their kids to kick around the soccer ball. I think having something delineated is a good idea. Personally, I think like a farm fence would look great. I don't think we could require the applicant to install a farm fence, but maybe having some sort of a signage that at least for hopefully 10 or 20 years, those signs will remain there. That will make it very transparent that that area back there is not part of your lot, because even when the pins get flagged, that'll last maybe a year or two, and then somebody's going to forget where their property corners are. But there might be a little bit better way than maybe how we've done it in the past to help protect these areas. I'm probably not in favor of the town taking over control of that, even though I think Bob had an idea that with all good intents. I just get worried about how much property the town could ultimately be having control of and having to police, and then you got a dead tree over on the property, and then the town gets called and has to go take down a $2,000 dead tree that's getting ready to fall on the property line. And so, but with that being said, I think we ought to maybe think about maybe some other ways. To me, the simplest would be to have some signage maybe on every other lot, something like that. That's going to be kind of the line of demarcation ultimately when this is field verified.
You're the applicant. Tell us who you are and give us an address, please.
Yes, ma'am. My name's Joseph Ayers. My father and I are doing the development of this from 918 Cherokee Boulevard, Knoxville, Tennessee. I'll give you a little background on the history of the property. During the downturn back in 2007, the Bridgemore was struggling with some notes and things like that, so we ended up buying the note that was on this particular piece of property to allow them to stay above water. And so that's when we acquired the property, and that very same year we put it into a conservation easement to hopefully, instead of take it from 50 lots that would be developed and the full 42 acres, to be able to only have 10, and to try to be good stewards of the land, and we thought that'd be a good thing for years to come. Now, what we're proposing is something that we think is very unique to the town of Farragut. There's not a whole lot of estate sites in Farragut, much more than 2 acres. And so we felt like this is something that can be extremely valuable. The homes that we're looking on here will be very, very nice. We're also the developers of Wind River over in Loudoun County. And so we've worked with a lot of the wetlands over there. We've worked with the Corps of Engineers, TVA, for several wetlands, not only on our property, but also on TVA's property, and helped them delineate them. We've put signs up and things like that on both private and public lands. We're very, very familiar when it comes to the wetlands. And I may be a little confused, but after meeting with Mark, I think it was a couple weeks ago, he instructed us to try to get the Bridgemore original plans of the wetlands and things like that, and from Billy, who's the engineer for Bridgemore. And so that's what we did, and that's where this information is coming from, along with all the GIS records and things like that. So I'm hoping that's going to kind of help you all understand where we're coming from as the wetlands. The common area, obviously the town requires that common area, and we think that'll be well kept, if not exactly how it is now. We've bush hogged the whole place for the last several years. I think having it in either an HOA or in restricted deed about the common area would actually help keep those wetlands in a better shape than what we've actually been able to keep it in over the last 10 or so years.
Any questions or comments? And you all are working with Mark on the subject too so far?
Correct, we are.
That's, like I say, I've had 3 or 4 versions of that one because of the access, and the very latest one's is on my computer, and he actually called out the dimensions showing that it was 400 feet. They'll need to obviously sign and seal the approved concept plan, and then they'll have to come back with the more detailed preliminary plat documents, and we'll look at things like they'll need to spot check and make sure that wetland delineation is still accurate and make adjustments accordingly. But for the purposes of this plan, they can use existing information, but they will need to make an update to that, as Bob says, when they do the preliminary plat, to make sure.
So I got a question for you. I know there's a sanitary sewer line that runs along the creek probably on both sides of the creek back there, probably on the Wentworth side and as well as your side. What do you see as I mean, you would be eligible for septic if you wanted, soil, assuming your soil met all the requirements for septic and your lots are large enough, they meet the requirements for septic. But I do have some concerns on some of those lots in the middle where the wetlands are. The only way to get those lots over to that sanitary sewer is to put a backhoe right through the wetlands and go put in a 4-inch pipe. It'd be kind of nice to figure out a way to eliminate having to go through those wetlands. I assume you also have sewer along McPhee Road. If you did that, the way the topography is, you probably have to use grinders, which you could use a low-pressure grinder system. But those are some things maybe that you might want to start thinking about for your preliminary plat about how to, and again, septic. You might very well be eligible for septic. But it would be nice just while we're at this stage to try to look at ways to not have to run sewer through that wetlands. So
I would assume, and don't quote me on this because I'm not part of Sterling or know enough about it myself. I would assume we come off McPhee Road and either use one of those E1 pumps to help pump it up there. That's what we do over in Wind River on all of our home sites.
Well, that's a really easy. I mean, it's a little more expensive than gravity, but it would eliminate the whole purpose of what I wanted to talk about was those wetlands.
Yeah,
So-
the staff, I wouldn't support running them through the wetlands. Yeah, I'm like Bob. I want to protect the wetland.
Right.
I think
What we're trying to do, and why we ended up, one of our concepts had some of the wetlands in some of these lots, and so working with staff and such, we felt like it would be better to have it in the common area and kind of keep it off people's property and either have the HOA take care of it. Like you said, I'm not sure the town really wants to.
No, I couldn't add. I mean,
purchase the property or anything like that. But
I'm just one planning commissioner, but I definitely wouldn't advocate the town taking. I think the town has pretty. I think Bud McKelvey would throw a fit if we put something else on his plate that he's in charge of. So, Bob, did you have something else?
I'm putting the sewer line across. I don't know what First Utility District will do about that, whether they're going to try to serve the customers from the front side or the back of the lot downhill from the house or what. But you can go through wetlands with an ARAP, provided you get approval from it for the state. And the approval for that ARAP, which alteration request for aquatic protection, comes with it a method of accomplishment that minimizes the footprint on the ARAP when you do the work there. And if you want to see one in progress now, you can go down to Cross Park Drive and look at the gross 100-foot wide strip that they have through the wetland there in 10 Mile Creek. And it's those ARAPs are on construction or almost pro forma when they're issued. And it's up to it really literally turns out to be up to the municipality to be sure that things go right. And that's what a town's for.
Well, let's jump in here and see if we can just avoid those wetlands completely with all the utilities. And I think we've got a developer that's willing to do that. And I think we have a level of understanding at this concept phase that we're discussing it today, so there's no surprises later on.
When this gentleman sells all the lots, he won't be there anymore.
Well, that's true. That's true. That's why
it'll be the 10 owners of those lots and any successive owners that occur later on, and that's where it gets lost. Right now, the intent is good. But 5 years from now, it might not be that good. It might not even be known.
Well, what we can do is put some transparency in this process and make sure that all the utilities are going to be provided in the preliminary plat design as well as the final plat and the as-built. So I think so that way nobody's clamoring for utilities at even a second or third generation lot owner. They're trying to figure out, where do I get my sewer? Well, it's already been identified. The E1 grinder systems would be by far the easiest and simplest, just to pick those up and pump it up to McPhee Road. So I think we're making some progress, and sure appreciate your comments, Bob. Thank you.
Any other questions for me?
I just want to make sure that I understood you correctly to say that the wetlands would be common property.
Correct.
And that these individual lots will only include an undivided interest of that property.
Correct. According to the information that we have acquired from Bridgemore and Billy and his engineering firm, which is what you see before you, we've adjusted those lots to make sure that they're not in the wetlands at all.
That'll avoid the issue that Bob brought up earlier.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
They'll just need to update the wetland delineation,
Yeah.
make sure it's still accurate. It may have changed a little bit here and there, and then adjust the lots, the final lot layouts to make sure that they're still on open space. I don't anticipate they'll be very different from what's shown here.
Joe, we might think about maybe some signage or something that you guys would feel most appropriate in keeping. Obviously, fencing would be great. If you don't want to go that route, I understand that, but it would be kind of nice preliminary plat maybe to talk about that. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of things that we could force you to do, but it sure would show a lot of goodwill in your nature if you guys would maybe be a little proactive about how to try to protect those in the future. The wetlands is what I'm talking about.
Any other questions or comments?
I want to make one comment about that. Over the years of watching that chunk of property down there along the west, or
On McPhee Road?
That so-called wetlands varies a lot.
Depending on how much rain we had?
It depends on how much rain we have, how much,
Well, you're right.
when it's.
It does, but there's some pretty real straightforward requirements for wetlands, and it has to do with the flora and the fauna and some other things, which what type of plants and animals are in there. So I think those are things that are very objective that can be determined. Civil engineers should be able to do that. Obviously, TDEC, they can come in and give you some guidance as well. You guys may already have enough information. Maybe you want to do some field verification just to make sure the wetlands are where we think they are. But otherwise, I think it's a good plan. I think it's just like you said, I think there's a need for these estate-sized lots. And I think there's a demand for it. I think it'll be beautiful. You'll have some beautiful homes going down McPhee Road.
Any other questions or comments? Do I have a motion?
So moved to approve.
Based on the stipulations, right?
What do we have? 6 items based on the 6 subject twos?
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you for coming. Item number 8, discussion and public hearing on amendment to Chapter 3, Section 12, F9A, to provide for a new height regulation for buildings constructed in the mixed-use town center portion of the general commercial C-1 zoning district, Town of Farragut applicant.
This is an item that we talked about last month, and it relates to our mixed-use town center portion of the general commercial zoning district. As you know, we have a requirement in that area for new buildings to be at least 2 stories. They can go up to 4 stories. They have to be at least 2 stories or have the appearance of being 2 stories as viewed from all 4 elevations. The property owner of the former Silver Spoon property, which is they're calling the Farragut Gateway project, obtained site plan approval back in May of 2016, and since that time they've been trying to make the numbers work based on the plan that was approved. And the issue that they're running into is they're marketing this project for potentially 2 restaurants and maybe another retail commercial use or 2. And with the size of the property, in this case about 2.2 acres, it's really too small to accommodate the amount of parking that they would need based on the uses that they're trying to solicit to this development, and then also provide for a functional second floor and have enough parking to meet the needs for a usable second floor. So what they're faced with is trying to build a building that looks like a 2-story building from all 4 elevations without being able to provide the leasable space that could help offset the cost of that building construction. So they're trying to build a fake 2-story building and more expensive building without really meeting, I think, the intent of what we were trying to do in that mixed-use town center. We were really hoping that people would be able to have a functional and usable second, third, fourth floor. But that has just not been the case with this particular property. And frankly, we were looking at other properties that are even smaller than this that are likely going to face the same issue, like the Phillips 66 property on the corner. And that's another piece of property that's very constrained, doesn't have a lot of space, and depending on what they're marketing that for, they're going to run into the same issue, and except probably there it'd be even more magnified. So when I brought this up, it seemed like there was some favorable response to looking at our current language in the mixed-use town center and providing for some flexibility for these smaller lots of record that are not part of larger developments that may have some shared parking, and to give them the ability to have a new building that's not 2 stories, provided that they aren't compromising the intent of what we're trying to do. In fact, the architectural design standards have some language in there that talks about an allowance for buildings that are less than 2 stories where they abut a major arterial road. So that would be the case in Silver Spoon property and Phillips 66, depending on the context. So what the staff has put together, based on our feedback from Planning Commission, is a copy of Ordinance 17-11, where we have added some language that would give flexibility for lots of record that are not part of larger development, that are less than 3 acres, to have the ability to present to you a building that's less than 2 stories. But that would only be allowed if the proposed building is in compliance with all the other building facade requirements that would apply to the mixed-use town center, and then the applicable standards in our architectural design standards. So the building, the way we've crafted this language, will still have to be 75% face brick on all 4 elevations. It would need to have some kind of iconic element, a defined cap, a very attractive looking building, similar to something like that. That's not a 2-story building, but it certainly doesn't look bad. It has a kind of a town center look to it. These are some other maybe good or bad examples, I don't know, but they're, some other buildings that are not 2-story, but they look like they might fit in, depending on the context, a town center look. So that's the language that we're proposing in Ordinance 1711. We feel that it gives flexibility on these smaller lots without really opening it up too broadly to compromise our design standards. So we still have some language in there that I think still promotes what we're trying to do in the town center area. So I don't know what your all's thoughts are on this, but I'll be happy to try to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Mark?
We had quite a bit of discussion at last month's meeting, but a few of you weren't here last, so I'd be interested in any comments that you all have.
I agree that the parking is, to me, an issue on a smaller lot like this.
Yeah, I agree. But you got to make it useful and economically possible.
It's got to be economically feasible to develop it, and obviously, if you can't make use of a 2-story building,
Yeah.
it makes no sense.
And it can actually
require-
make the building look worse than if you just
Absolutely.
build a 1-story real looking building that still had all the real elements that we're looking for. Would be even better looking than somebody trying to build a faux second floor
Especially where you have like the Silver Spoon location.
Yeah.
Where Kingston Pike's higher than the
Yeah,
side.
right. That really,
It looks like a Hollywood set or something.
Yep. Yeah.
I think your wording, proposed wording here is
like it.
fine, yeah.
You are with it? Did you look at it, Paul? Were you okay with it? Okay.
It's kind of ironic, we've been talking about two larger parking lots, and now we're talking about two smaller parking lots for
Yeah.
the business, so,
Restaurants will do that, though.
yes.
That's what's driving that.
Yeah, that's.
And we really
yeah.
want restaurants back in that corridor.
absolutely.
We've lost
Yeah.
quite a few restaurants in and out of that corridor over the years, so it'd be nice to have some restaurants.
Well, wasn't
Absolutely.
that one reason Aubrey's departed as well?
Absolutely, yeah.
Was
They
the
had about
parking-
half the parking that they ultimately needed.
Right.
So, and they just didn't think of that 25 years ago when that original building was built. So, a motion to, were there any comments from the audience or questions? Madam Chairman, are we ready to
We're
entertain
ready
a
for
motion? This one's pretty easy. Motion to approve an amendment to Chapter 3, Section 7, subsection F9, to provide for new height regulation for buildings constructed in the mixed-use town center portion of C1.
Second.
Second,
Everybody second?
I'll second.
yeah, we do.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
3 seconds, excuse me.
Hope this helps.
Hey, maybe we'll see you next month with your renderings. Good. Good.
So then we move on to
Work program.
item number 9. Does anybody need a break here before we get started on this? Ready to move on? Okay. Review of the 2018 work program items involving the planning commission. And this is for discussion purposes only.
As y'all may remember, we did this last fiscal year, where the staff brought before you the items that you all may be involved, will be involved with, that are on at least our department's work program. We have actually 20 items on our larger work program, but we culled out the ones that we would be bringing before you all, some of which are reoccurring and kind of we're works in progress, if you will. I'll just briefly go through these, and really, if you all have a sense for ones that you really want us to focus on at the staff level, because we've talked really kind of about all of these to some extent, that would be helpful to get your all's thoughts on what really should be prioritized at this point. What are we likely to need to be in place based on what we anticipate could happen in the near future in terms of development in the town or whatever. So the continuing to be current with our architectural design standards. Last year we made a couple of amendments to the standards themselves that actually increased, I think, their effectiveness. We've already seen that on a couple of buildings. We upped the masonry percentages from 60 to 75%. We also adopted a color palette for accent colors. I think both of those things take out some of the subjectivity that y'all were facing with, particularly with colors. And we'll continue to, as we work with the design standards, there'll be things that'll come up that we'll need to have a discussion about. So that's just a recurring item. The second one is training sessions, another thing that we do every year. The staff will try to always make you all aware of training opportunities. The Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals are actually required by state law to have at least 4 hours of training per year, and we'll try to make sure that y'all have an opportunity to get free and good good training.
Mark, on
Yeah.
that one, will the staff advise us if we've met that requirement or not? I don't recall. I mean, I know I've had training sessions, but I'm not sure if I've got 4 hours or not.
Yeah, we can do that, or if y'all request it, we keep a record of it. We do keep that. Some people get 20
Yeah,
a
right.
year, and some I have to really, kind of keep after to get their 4 hours, but.
But let us know if we're deficient, will you?
Last year was fine.
I think I did.
It was actually, we had a couple that were way over, which is good. There's no problem with that.
Mark, do we run that on a calendar year or fiscal year?
I've done that on just a calendar year, is how I do that.
It's a little easier that way, probably.
And I think that's what the state law is, the way it treats it, so. We're going to hope to finish updating our pedestrian and bicycle plan and the major road plan. Probably could have already done those things if it was just simple text updates, but I really would like to have a little bit more engagement with the public on these cross sections. You all had an exercise with those a couple of months ago, what you preferred for different collector streets in the town. What kind of future cross sections would we like to see on those as they get developed and redeveloped? We would actually like to have a map that you could pull up on the website, and if you clicked on a section of roadway, that it would actually pull up an image of the approved cross section for that road, so that whoever is interested in developing or moving to Farragut would kind of have an idea of what our vision is for that particular street. And these collector streets are the ones that are most likely to be the candidates, like your Virtue, Allen Kirby, Boring, those type streets. So we'll continue to work on that and hopefully get that finalized pretty soon, because I think that's something that we'd like to have in place. The subdivision regulations, just working through those. We made a pretty significant amendment to the subdivision regulations last year that kind of surprised we didn't have a lot of comments about. But basically, when you develop on a street that's non-local, you have to ensure that your part of that frontage meets the complete street's cross-section. So that's something that we have added to our subdivision regulations to give it more teeth, I guess, if you will, for developing on these collector streets mainly, so that people know what our expectations are ahead of time. And we'll continue to look at that. I know when I review plans, I look at every new road that we're approving and making sure, at least from my perspective, that what's being shown makes sense. You remember we had that little cul-de-sac off Old Stage Road that had no opportunity to be extended because everything was built up around it. Well, it didn't make sense to me, and ultimately you all agreed to have a 26-foot wide sea of asphalt there when you really don't need that for that kind of context. So just making decisions like that are logical based on the context, and really trying to get that in our subdivision regulations to give them a little bit more flexibility to be able to make those kind of decisions, and maybe even look at what our default standards are and really think about those as to whether we want to have those revisited.
Mark, what's a short street?
Well, generally anything less than 600 feet would be considered a short street. Now, if it had the opportunity to be connected, like we've seen in some of Briarstone, for example, where the average daily trips could end up being, several hundred per day, then I wouldn't necessarily support a more narrow street. So you got to think about, or if you had a real opportunity for a likelihood for people parking on the street a lot, then we'd have to think about that as well.
Yeah, because I know on our street sometimes, often 2 cars cannot pass. There's so much parking on the street,
Yeah.
either from people, maintenance people, lawn people.
That's true, yeah.
Utility people.
Guess that's a form of traffic
And
calming.
company. That's what.
People, that's probably a form of traffic calming. People have to slow down. But yeah, that's right. We have to think about each situation and make sure that what we do makes sense for now and the future. But I guess my point is, don't just blindly follow what the regulations say without thinking about them and making sure it makes sense and is really what we're trying. Because if it doesn't, we need to revisit our regulations and give them that kind of flexibility. The comprehensive land use plan, we'll continue to work on updates to that. We made some amendments to the zoning ordinance last year that I think helped to some degree implement different aspects of that, dealing with like front yard setbacks and things like that. Evaluate the outdoor outlet drive corridor. That really, to me, is a really important piece of vacant land in the town that is kind of a, it's got a lot of potential, and I think it's real important to make sure that whatever happens there, we do it right and think about it, and make sure it's something good for our future as a town, and something that's innovative and unique, kind of distinguishes itself from what's around it.
And in line with that, we probably should continue to keep tabs on what Knoxville is doing along that area too.
Yeah. It's a good point. I think they're building a big apartment complex
Right.
down at the corner.
Now.
Right now, yeah.
Area the rumor for Top Golf.
I don't know. We haven't really gotten any proposals on that. So I've heard rumors, but I haven't seen anything on that. But I think anything that happens on that corridor, we really need to look at it carefully as a planning commission and make sure that we get what you all want for the future, I think. And that kind of relates to number 7, just looking at making sure we have appropriate land uses for future development. We need to think about how the town, where its income comes from, and also the fact that these large, big box businesses are not doing well nationally. And what does that mean? What should we be trying to focus on bringing into the town that would meet our standards? But that is recognizes what's happening in the retail world out there, because we're, as you all know, dependent on sales tax, so we've got to be aware of that with projects that come before us, and make sure that we give revenue generation some thought when that happens. And maybe even looking for, some of these centers. We looked at this when we updated our parking requirements. We have a lot of unused real estate, unused valuable real estate in the town. And are there ways we can maybe work with some property owners to actually encourage the construction of liner buildings on the outer portion of some of these parking lots? That would make more revenue generating use of the property. And also, I think, help the existing entities, because when people drive by and see a large sea of asphalt that's vacant, it's not a good reflection on that business. And I think they're more apt to be drawn to that business if they see a lot of activity and energy. And a liner building can help with that. So we need to, kind of look at that.
There's a couple of different comments in the press talk, Farragut Press today, about that very subject.
About that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a couple of vacant large
Almost
buildings that really need some help somehow. A lot of this is out of the staff's ability and the town's ability, frankly. But anything we can do from a regulatory perspective, I think, to not prevent that from happening, at least try to incentivize good redevelopment or, trying to enhance what we already have developed in some fashion, I think would be good. Same way with our subdivisions. When we had an applicant last year petition to change some of our zoning related to housing. And one of the things that came out of that discussion was, well, we got a lot of affordable housing already in the town. How can we keep the value of that up and keep it from not degrading? So we need to focus on engaging those subdivisions. I think more active property maintenance, maybe work with some of the subdivisions informing, citizen property maintenance watch groups, if you will, to help the town, because we're trying to make sure that their investment is protected, and it shows interest from the town in those older developments that oftentimes I think feel like the town's not listening to them, or they don't think they're as important as some of the newer developments. So we're hoping to hire somebody that will help with the property maintenance aspect of that, and I think Bart and I and that person will all try to figure out ways to try to engage some of these older developments. Most of them don't have homeowners associations, so it's kind of a challenge to figure out how to do that. We can look at what some other communities maybe have done in that regard, but just trying to show them some interest and make sure that those really valuable parts of the town don't spiral into kind of an undesirable location. So stormwater ordinance, we're working with engineering on that. Hopefully that will be updated this coming year. And then the sign ordinance is another thing that's been on the agenda the last couple of years. We haven't really had any issues with that, so that's why I haven't really personally prioritized it. It needs to be updated to address the content provisions in our current ordinance, but the question is whether that is a higher priority than some of these other items on our work program. So it's all about balancing priorities and time, which has been my biggest problem, is having the time to work on these. So anyway, I don't know what your all's thoughts are. If you have any of these that stand out that you think you really would like for us to focus on, particularly in the short term. Yeah.
I've already talked to you about, and Ron Williams and I talked about this last year. I'm very interested in this with the aging subdivisions. I think that affects the whole town from a lot of aspects. And I know we've had people come into the planning commission who live in some of these subdivisions, and they have been very vocal in the fact they think that because their houses are not multi-million-dollar homes, that we don't pay any attention to them, and that's not the way we feel about that at all. So I think that's a very important factor. One thing you haven't mentioned on here anywhere is the technology. How are we doing with updating on all of that information and the ordinances and all that?
That's in part of our other work program. It's more of internal. You talking about just making it more automated, and
right.
Yeah.
Well, that and what the person you had come in to advise on that.
Yeah, we had the IT strategic plan, and we have an IT person that we hired several months ago. He's doing an excellent job. He's already rewired the town hall building because we had a hardware problem before we could start on software. So he identified that pretty quickly, and then he's taken different aspects of our adopted IT strategic plan and working on implementing that.
Well, I noticed in the last couple of weeks when I was down Parkside, they're beginning to install the small cell.
Well, they have the 3 already up. I went out and looked at 2 of them today, and Yeah, I don't know. What do y'all think about those? Yeah, has everybody seen them?
I think they look better than what I envisioned.
Good.
A little bit more than what I had envisioned.
Yeah, the antenna looks a little bigger than I thought, but I don't really think anybody would notice it hardly.
You know, I drove down that way this evening
You
and
notice it?
didn't even notice it. I'm
Well, it must
sorry
be
to say,
pretty good
but I
then.
did see them constructing it the other day. I just didn't think to look today.
Yeah, they need to backfill and sod the area that they disturbed, but other than that, I think they've.
Well, on the light pole itself, the fact that it's the same color as the light pole is
It's close.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, you can tell it's not the same because it's hard to match something that's been weathered for years, and, you know, you just can't really match it 100%, but they tried.
Matter of fact, I'm not sure I even would have noticed it had they not been there with the bucket truck that day working on it.
Yeah.
So, which is a lot to say when we think about cell towers.
We got the vaults, and you can go look at those. They painted those green, same as the pole, and the meter box is painted green on the side. So yeah, I think it's pretty good, especially when you look at some of the other ones in the area that have been installed. These are, to me, a lot less noticeable with how they've treated the colors and the size of the structures and making sure the most of the structure other than the antenna and the meter box are underground. The vaults are pretty big. They're a little bit bigger than I thought, but they'll probably blend in over time.
Well, I've told you before, but I have thought about what Ed said one time about when you drive down Kingston Pike in other areas, we don't really think now about the telephone poles and all the lines with the utilities and everything. But I started noticing that, and it's really, there's a lot of it there. But we just, we're used to it. And we're not used to those tall cell phone towers, so, which is better.
It looks so much better when all of it's underground, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's one thing we did finish last year was the telecommunications ordinance, and that was a lot of fun. So we'll.
Probably ready to be updated again.
It's probably changing already.
Bob, you got something you want to say?
I do, usually. There's a couple of things that I think you ought to consider, and it's not necessarily in the work plan, just as a matter of doing business. I'd really like to see you open the training sessions that you have for the planning commissioners to everybody in town who wants to come. Now, that won't be you won't have 1,000 people, I doubt, if you have more than 10 of these seats filled there, but a lot of people in town come to planning commission and they don't really understand what planning commission does and how they do it and why they do it. And this would be a good way to enlighten some of them. And there's room to do that. My contention is that if you're a professional engineer, you can count that as one of your PDHs, the way I read the law. And the other thing is that I think it came up twice tonight, but you all are going to sort of urgently need to look at the issue that you had on the appearance of the building. Farragut is a town that's in redevelopment now. It's going to be in redevelopment for the rest of its life. And this issue is going to come up every time you meet almost. It would be nice to have a set of logic laid out so that you could render a decision on it based on looking through the precedents and the logic and say, well, we did this and it worked this way and seemed to be all right, so we'll do that. But anyway, it's what you get into when you start worrying about architectural standards, and it's extremely subjective. So anything that you all can do as planning commissioners in eliminating the subjectivity would make your life a lot easier, and Noah wouldn't have to sit here and think up ways to do that. Yeah. Ms. Carr would be a big help in that, I think. Let her be the judge.
So
Thank
one
you,
of,
Rob.
one of the things, yeah,
Thank
one
you,
of the
Rob.
things along those lines is the fact that we have tried to make it more flexible for builders and developers, but it comes back to bite us a lot of times. And
Yeah, it's a fine line.
Right.
It's a
So
balance.
we've seen the need to go back and narrow down
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah, I think with
because
the
of that.
masonry and the color, adopting a color palette actually and taking some of that subjectivity out. Still giving people lots of choices,
Right.
but narrowing it down and keeping it more defined. So we definitely want to do that, I think. Does anybody else have any that you like,
Well,
wanted us to?
you mentioned color. Talking about O'Reilly, is that red? Is that the right color?
I have sent the architect an email because
Okay.
that's not what is
I was like, I don't think that was on our color wheel.
I don't think it was either.
Well, I kept thinking,
Maybe that's the primer, but it sure looks like it's the finished coat to me.
I think that's their typical O'Reilly's, but
Yeah, I think that's
the,
Looks a little bright to me.
Their color scheme.
the color that was approved, I forgot what it was called, but it came, we talked about it at length.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
With you all, and it's on the color building elevation, so
Well, I
until
appreciate
they
it.
get that brought into compliance with what was approved, they won't be opening over there, because we can't do a final inspection until they address all the site requirements, and that's one of them. That was a big one. I saw that.
Well,
as soon
I'm glad
as
it's
it
not just
happened.
me. I thought, man, well, maybe I'm colorblind. Maybe I'm just, or
No,
maybe I'm too neurotic about these colors.
It
I
stuck
sent-
out like a sore thumb to me.
Otherwise, it's a really nice looking building. They've ruined it with that color, but yeah, that's not what shows up on their approved building elevation. So that will have to be corrected. Anything else that y'all have on that?
One of those items on the comprehensive land use plan may include reviewing the designations of those undeveloped lots, whether it's appropriately designated or not. Didn't we talk about doing that?
What you talking about now? Undeveloped.
Yeah, the vacant,
About wetlands and,
just undeveloped property.
okay.
What, we've got it designated as certain land use
Yeah,
designations, right?
yes.
I thought we were
Yeah.
going to revisit some of those to make sure that they were appropriately designated
Oh, yeah.
at this point in time.
Yeah, I think that could be part of the comprehensive
It
land
looked
use
like
plan,
it
yeah.
could be included in there. I just,
Yeah, there's some in there that I question. I mean, like the Harville property is one example, and we changed that one to what really it should have been. It was the
Okay.
open space cluster instead of
It was medium density.
Medium density, like apartments.
that's what I'm
and that.
talking about, is looking
Yeah.
at those and making sure they're appropriate.
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff to work on, obviously, here.
You got some
but,
help now.
Yeah, we got some help.
Shoot, you ought to get it done.
Hit the ground
Mark-
running.
Mark can probably wrap these up in a couple of months. Well, we'll work on them. If y'all have any thoughts on priorities, and we'll be happy to listen. And well, I'm sure we'll hear from the Board of Mayor and Alderman too. They're working on a strategic plan update, so that'll help too with what we need to be working on. That's all I got.
okay, anybody else got anything? If not, the July 20th, 2017 meeting of the Farragut Planning Commission is adjourned.
Thank you.
Ralph goes to
Should remember that
Well, Mark said you were going to run the meeting next month. He's going on vacation.
the 720, Scott is 78 years old.
He's ran a few of these.